Yeah. Is this this? I should shut up.
Okay, sorry, slightly tentative. No, I think we're okay. Right. Yeah, let's resume then, please. And yeah, we had 3 more residents, councillors, groups to speak. I've got Councillor Weldon, Nikki Barton, and Neil Strachan. So, Councillor, yeah. Right, I've got a hard copy of your statement, so yeah, floor is yours.
Check what the statement looks like, which one it is.
It has my name in the top right corner.
Name top right.
Oh yes, I've got it. Yep, that's it. Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
No.
It's got handwritten on the top right hand corner,
Yeah.
T. Weldon.
T. Weldon.
Thank you.
Okay. Floor is yours. We seem to have a little bit of feedback. No, gone again. Okay. Councillor.
Right. My name is Terry Weldon. I am a Waverley Borough Councillor for Haslemere East, which includes the site. I also am a Haslemere Town Councillor, and for the past 6 years, I've been first Vice Chair and then Chair of the Haslemere Town Planning Committee. I want to speak today not as a representative of the town, but in a personal capacity informed by my experience. I am not going to go over once again all the many objections to the application, which we've heard and will be rehearsed thoroughly over the next few days. What I do want to do is offer some thoughts from my perspective of what I've learnt as chair of the planning committee on what I think is the central challenge facing this inquiry. That is to balance 2 conflicting demands. And so, here in Haslemere, we have in the neighbourhood plan, as in the Waverley local plan, and indeed in the national planning policy framework, 2 conflicting demands. On the one hand, we have an obligation to protect our valuable green spaces, and especially areas designated national landscape, formerly AONB. On the other, we have a compelling obligation also to provide sites for housing to accommodate a growing population. So what do we do when an irresistible force meets an immovable object? We have in Haslemere extremely limited land available for housing, which is not formally designated either as national landscape or green belt or LGBV or anything else. We have many reasons for refusing development, and yet we have a really critical need for housing. And I share, my instinct goes along with the NPPF statement that the presumption must be in favour of sustainable development unless there are compelling reasons not to do so. So we are absolutely committed. My screen is not working and I no longer have my own copy. Howard, could I have I think you've got a copy of my statement. I didn't get a hard copy back myself. I will get mine, it doesn't matter, I've got it now. Yeah, when we have these conflicting demands, we've got to find ways to balance the conflicts. In the case of this particular development, there is a major need to protect the national landscape. And we've heard a lot about that. I'm not going to go into the details, but it is absolutely clear that this is genuinely valuable national landscape. However, in Hosmer, we are not NIMBYs. We recognise the need for housing, and my personal position always is to support development unless there are strong reasons to oppose it. For that reason, in the past, we have indeed approved selected applications for development on A1B or national landscape land, and I know that the appellants will be referring to that. How I have approached the matter in the past, and I think that the planning committee has done in the past, is to scrutinise carefully the strength of the argument on each side. So, for example, looking at the application to develop the Royal School site in Hindhead, which is designated national landscape, we did in fact approve the application. And this is why. In the first instance, although the site is designated national landscape, in my view, it's of fairly poor quality. It is this particular street it lies in is essentially a residential street with houses on the one side and two schools on the other. There's nothing about it that, in my view, is genuinely natural beauty. Equally, the specific proposal, the site as a school, is previously developed. It's not formally designated brownfield, but there is no way in which it can be described as a greenfield site. And indeed, the specific plans that have been proposed are largely built, or will be built, largely on what is currently hard standing. So that is why we agreed to approve that site. We also approved the site on what is called the Old Grove site nearby. In that case, again, in my view, it's fairly poor quality national landscape, and indeed the housing is of particular kind, supporting genuinely affordable housing. We, in the town, this hasn't yet come to Waverley, but in the town, we have recently approved a development on what is known as the Longdean site off Hedgehog Lane, a site which we have regularly opposed in the past with previous applications, and indeed there is a Supreme Court judgment against application going back many years. We've approved this particular application because it really does offer genuinely affordable social housing to rent. So from my point of view, where we have approved housing on protected sites, it has been with very good reason, and I just don't see that we have very good reason in this case. We do have an obligation to provide housing, but as somebody else has said, we need to provide housing at the right place, at the right price, in the right place, and of the right kind. I don't believe that this housing meets any of those criteria. In respect of place, well, clearly, if it's a highly desirable national landscape which must be protected, it's definitely in the wrong place. Of the right kind, in my view, and in the view of the Haslemere Council, and I think also in the Waverley local plan, the priority need for housing is primarily for new entrants to the market, young people starting out, and older people wanting to scale down. From what I have seen of the plans, I do not believe that these houses represent the right kind of housing, and certainly not of the right kind. The median price of housing in Haslemere, well, certainly in Waverley, is about 17 times median income of locals. And for people coming into the market for the first time, that ratio will be even higher. The appellants state and emphasize that they are providing more than the usual ratio of affordable housing. But then the question arises, as was asked by a previous speaker here, what is meant by affordable? Affordable, even if it is defined as a 35% discount to the market price, 35% discount on market price is still way more than an affordable housing for the median income, and even less for young people on less lower than the median incomes. On that basis, I believe that there are very, very strong reasons for protecting the national landscape. I do not believe that the housing offered in this proposal amounts to either the right place or the right kind, and definitely not the right place. That's it. Thank you. And I am willing to take questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, Mr. Marucci.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Can I ask you a few questions, please? I mean, I assume you're not a member of the Hazelmere South Residents Association or the Hazelmere Society? No. I just want to ask you about some of these other sites that you've referred to in your evidence. So you refer to the Royal School site being approved. What do you mean by that? Because it doesn't have a planning permission, does it, at the moment?
There were two phases. There was first an initial investigation when the local plan was revised.
Right.
And during in that inquiry, there was a provision to include the Royal School as an allocated site. It was then approved. I'm talking the town council.
Right.
And the town council certainly approved, raised no objection when the plan came through the town.
It's an allocated site. It's an allocated site.
It's an allocated.
But it has no planning permission, does it? At the moment.
We have seen plans at Hazelmere Town which we had no objection to. Right.
But there are objections to that site from Natural England on the basis of inadequate SANG provision, Sport England, and the local flood authority. So, I mean, that's a site we talked about, 2 years ago when this inquiry was heard before. That site has not delivered any houses. It hasn't got a permission at the moment, has it?
I was speaking from the perspective of the Hazelmere Town Council, and we have raised no objection. That's all I want to say.
Right.
In terms of the objection you raised that was issued by Surrey Hills A&B, that was a retrospective objection. When it first came to the Town Council, they raised no objection.
I didn't mention Surrey Hills. So the Royal School site,
Yes.
I mean, that has provided 0 housing so far, correct?
There is a plan for housing.
Right, okay. A plan for housing that's subject to multiple objections from statutory consultees, yes? And hasn't progressed for some time now, correct?
Probably.
Yeah, probably. And then you talk about you supported an application for a development on the Longdean house site.
Yes.
In Hedgehog Lane. Sorry, was this very recently? Because you say not yet considered by Waverley Borough Council. There's an application, isn't there, I think, for 14 units on Hedgehog Lane that was, I think, due to go to committee this Wednesday. Is that the one you're referring to?
Correct.
Yeah. So that, again, you say you supported the application. The position is, again, that was subject, I think, to an officer recommendation for approval.
Yes.
Yes. But it was called in by councillors. Were you one of the councillors who called it in?
Yes.
Yes. So officers were prepared to grant it. You've called it in. Are you objecting to it?
No, that's not correct. Officers were inclined to refuse it.
I see.
And we were minded to approve it.
Okay. But at the moment, that's not now going to committee on Wednesday.
No, it is not.
No.
The applicants have withdrawn that.
Right. So again, that hasn't delivered any housing.
No, the point I was making in my submission is very simple, that we at Hazelmere Town Council try to scrutinise the strength of arguments on each side.
And then Old Grove.
Yes.
Old Grove, again, that's an allocated site, correct?
Yes.
But again, it has no planning permission, does it?
I'm not aware of that.
No. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, councillor. Looking back at my list, we've got Nikki Barton. Okay. Thank you very much. And Neil Strachan.
I've got speaking notes here. I will submit them tomorrow.
That's, sorry. Just catching up with my paperwork. Bear with me 1 second. Yeah, sorry. You were saying you've got some speaking notes.
I'll submit.
If you can transfer those to a note, it would be very helpful. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I speak as a Hazelmere resident and a retired highway engineer. I've lived in Hazelmere for 20 years. I was employed by West Sussex. Sorry, can you be my?
Oh.
Sorry, thank you.
Sorry.
Yep. Right, I'll start again. I speak as a Hazelmere resident of 20 years and a retired highway engineer. I was employed by West Sussex County Council, County Surveyors and Hampshire County Council Highways, and then lately Halcrow Consulting Engineers. So I'll only comment on highway matters. I'll refer to the appellant's transport assessment dated 21st of June 2022 and manual traffic counts that I carried out during the morning peak on the 11th, 13th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 26th, 27th and 31st of March this year. I used similar locations as in the transport assessment. Junction 1, the Midhurst Road and junction with Scotland Lane. Junctions 2 and 4, Bell Road between the A286 and A287. And I added a further location, the junction of Sturt Road, that's the A287 and Camelsdale Road. Just cut a long story short, basically I only did the morning peak. In the morning peak, the majority of the traffic flow is south to north. And in the evening peak, it's the other way round, probably to a percentage of about 30% of the is traveling south and 100% traveling north. 100% is traveling north, 30% are traveling south. And I only monitored the north flow traffic during the morning peak. So just to cut to the chase, the A286 Midhurst Road was, I didn't go with in the transport assessment, there's RFC figures. Those are a little bit confusing for the layperson. That's ratio of flow to capacity. So I just went with an hourly traffic flow. So the hourly traffic flow during the peak was between 450 and 620 vehicles per hour. That's just on the A286. There's slightly less, which might be surprising to some, on the A287 Sturt Road. That varied between 400 and 570 vehicles per hour during the morning peak. That's a total approach from the West Sussex county boundary into Hazelmere of over 1,000 vehicles an hour during the morning peak. Surprisingly, when I did my first traffic surveys, there is a significant amount of traffic travelling west to east and some traffic travelling east to west, which paints a slightly confusing picture. Generally, first noted at junction 1, that's the Midhurst Road and Scotland Lane, where generally up to 20% of the traffic that's travelling north on the A286 then turns right up Scotland Lane. I was quite surprised by that large amount of traffic. That's the maximum. Sometimes it's down at 10, 15%. Then when you go back to the Bell Road link between the A286 and A287, there's a significantly, an even larger amount of traffic coming out of Bell Road joining the A286. And that can be at 15-minute periods within the morning peak, that was as high as 40% of the traffic was coming out of the Bell Road link, that's past Coombers, and joining the A286. So what do we, I'll just sort of cut to the assessment really. So what we've got is we've got a large amount of traffic flowing south to north. We've also got traffic travelling, if you like, bypassing Hazelmere to the south. So they're either going from Camelsdale direction through the Bell Road link or back to the junction and back up onto the Midhurst Road, then cutting up Scotland Lane. Some are then going into Hazelmere High Street, because obviously there's not the same percentage that are going up Scotland Lane that are also coming from Bell Road. So some are then going to the High Street. So what this means is that for those of us that know Hazelmere, the main route through Hazelmere, east to west, west to east, through Lower Street to the High Street is gridlocked during the morning peak. So what people are doing, traffic is like water, it takes the easiest route. So in effect, it's bypassing Hazelmere to the south, and it's using these roads I've just discussed. So if you're coming from Liphook direction, or you're coming from Hammer, Camelsdale, you're travelling round Bell Road, and then you're travelling onto the Midhurst Road, the A286, and you're either going to the High Street, or then you're cutting off Scotland Lane and going Blackdown Road onto the Petworth Road and maybe going north that way. So what this means is we've got a large amount of traffic on the particular piece of road where the appellants want to put a right turn lane, and that's traffic during the peak. And again, without going into too much detail, from a highway design perspective, a right turn lane is better than not having any lane at all, but it's certainly not a perfect highway solution. The reason for that is it's all right for traffic on the A286 that wants to turn right, but for traffic that wants to go from accessing the appellant's site and wanting to go north, there's not going to be a joint right turn lane for them. They're going to have to wait for a gap. So the ideal highway design solution for the appellant's access to the A286 would obviously be a mini roundabout. You get less accidents, but there just isn't the room. That's partly to do with the contours, the gradients, and such. So a right turn lane is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And then when you go further up the road, you've also got a narrow, in the transport assessment, it says the A286 it varies, it's about 6 meters wide. When you're designing a highway nowadays, the highway is designed to be 7.3 meters wide. So you've got a narrow trunk road, the A286. And incidentally, getting onto the footway on the west side from Scotland Lane up to the town is very narrow in places, positively dangerous. It's 0.6 meters wide in places. None of these issues are like to be ameliorated by the creating a right turn lane on the appellant's site. So moving on, obviously, all I've done with the traffic flow figures is done a comparison, the numbers on the A286 and the numbers on the A287. I was quite surprised by that, because I thought most people would travel on the A287 and then go through Hindhead and get onto the A3 if they're going north. But it seems that more people are travelling on the A286 and heading towards Hazelmere High Street. Now, I also went down to the new Sturt Road development, and as we all know, local residents, the A287 is an absolute nightmare because of course there's on-street parking. It's a trunk road, but there's on-street parking. And for whatever reason, we have allowed the Sturt Road development of 135 houses to access that major trunk road. So what has now, my perception is that in the intervening period with that site coming on tap, and now there's about 100 dwellings that are occupied, again, traffic like water takes the easiest route. And so what's probably happened is that, there's just displacement of traffic from the A287 onto the A286, because there's more traffic on the A286, because the A287 is very difficult to pass during peak periods. So we've pushed more traffic onto the A286, and then obviously it's also likely that people, again, they think it's 1.25 miles longer to go up to Hindhead and onto the A3. So again, people are probably making a decision to go A286, Hazelmere High Street, Milford, and onto the A3 that way. So we've got a problem with this particular stretch of road. I note also from the transport assessment that, quite rightly, with the RFC figures, that's ratio to capacity, they suggest that the maximum that the ratio to flow capacity should be is less. It should be less than 0.85. Well, I noticed in some of their table 6.4 and table 6.5, you're looking at in 2026, you're looking at RFC figures of 0.72, which is approaching maximum, and I would suggest that it is maximum. Just as an aside, I was on the Bell Road link counting traffic during the morning peak on the 26th of March. And just to show what Armageddon looks like on the roads, you might remember that the A3 tunnel had maintenance works which overran. So the A3 tunnel was closed on the 26th and nothing was moving. It was absolutely gridlocked completely. And that was, and that happens when there's a flood on the rail bridge by the station. So, just to get an appreciation of what Armageddon looks like, that's what it looks like. So what I would argue is, and it's in the appellant's transport assessment, what they're trying to do is add a further 592 vehicle trips to the A286, which I would suggest is not a sensible idea. Purely from a neutral perspective, from a highway infrastructure perspective, it would be a better solution to access onto Scotland Lane. Why you would consider accessing onto a major trunk road, I cannot imagine what was going through the highway designer's head, because it's just nonsensical. With that, with trunk roads reaching capacity, it just does not make any sense at all. I just finished with a few further points. Walking footways, I've sort of covered. I spent many hours in March out on those various, never saw a single cyclist. It's pie in the sky trying to encourage people to get on their bikes. They'd rather get into their Range Rover Evoque and drive to the railway station like that. You ain't going to get people on bikes. Completely pointless. And the new, I commute as well, the new cycling store at the railway stations nearly always empty. Just like, that was a waste of money by South West Trains. Pedestrians, as I've already covered, you look at it on a plan and a map and you think that's a great idea. It's only 800 metres from the town centre. It's very hilly. That's the reason people don't cycle. That's also a problem for pedestrians as well. So encouraging pedestrians to walk from the appellant's site is going to be difficult. And as I say, it's positively dangerous, the width of the footpath on the A286. It's too narrow. So in summary, if you, as I say, my neutral point is if you had to develop this site, you don't put a right turn lane on a major trunk road which is near capacity. You put a mini roundabout, and there isn't the room to put one of those. And an additional 592 trips, I would suggest, is too much. That's my summary point. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Mr. Marucci.
So can I just understand your role here? So you are a Hazelmere resident, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Have you, and you've previously objected to this scheme, have you?
I did object to the scheme. Yeah, I think
Right.
like 500 other local residents.
Yeah, okay, but you're here giving evidence about transport and traffic matters.
Yeah.
But in
Happy to
terms,
do that.
well, that's what you have been doing, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, just on that, I mean, given that you have a personal interest in this, that you're objecting, we can't treat your evidence, can we, as genuinely expert evidence, because an expert has to be independent. And
I haven't asked you to treat it as expert evidence.
Okay.
I'm
Right.
just providing my professional knowledge
Yeah.
to assist the inquiry.
Okay, so we can agree we're not going to be treating your evidence as expert evidence.
Well, I mean, I've been out, I've done traffic surveys all my life.
I'm sure you
I do
have.
know about this because I know about RFCs. I am highly critical of the transport assessments produced because, you know, it's almost like a bit of a bluff job.
Right.
And the use of RFC figures, you know, that's great for the professionals, but for the layperson to understand the traffic movement. And what I've actually tried to do is to explain the traffic movements as they occur in a more sensible, more coherent way to provide a bit of context, because I think it is important.
What was the question I asked you?
I remember.
No, because you didn't try to answer it. You just went off on a spiel. So try and answer the questions.
Yeah.
So we're agreed, aren't we, that we're not treating your evidence as expert evidence, correct?
That's
Yes or
entirely-
no, first of all?
I mean, that's.
Yes or no,
If
first
you
of all?
want to do that, that's fine. As I say,
It really would help me, yes or no, and then qualify it, honestly.
I think you
Expert
should-
evidence, yes or
yes,
no, and
yes,
qualify.
yes, treat my evidence
As expert. And do you want to qualify that at all?
No,
Okay,
I'm
that's
happy
fine.
to.
So we're treating your evidence as expert evidence?
Yes.
It can't be, can it? Because you're not independent. You object on a personal basis to this. What professional memberships do you have? Are you a member of the?
I'm not anymore, no. I'm
None of them
retired.
at all?
No.
No. So, but you don't feel you have to abide by any of their rules or guidance about giving expert evidence?
You know, I was a civil engineer for 30 years, so I'm yeah.
So is the answer you don't think you have to abide by any rules that apply to
I
professional
do
engineers?
abide by rules all the time.
Well, okay, so you're not so let's be clear. This is a personal matter for you. We must agree that your evidence cannot be treated as expert evidence because that would be.
I did say that.
All right.
I am a concerned
Thank
resident
you.
as well,
Okay.
but I'm happy to
Yes.
give
Good.
my expert advice as well.
When did you do these traffic surveys? Was it March? Did you say?
March, yeah.
So March of this year.
March of this year.
So you'd never done traffic surveys before,
I have done traffic surveys before,
right?
yeah.
So these are new ones.
Yeah, these are new
Okay.
ones.
And
I'm not employed. I'm doing them
No.
off my own back, yeah.
Okay, so
But
the
I have, whilst I was in employment with West Sussex County Council Highways and Hampshire, I have done traffic surveys, quite a number.
Well, that wasn't my question. So let's just be clear on this. You did them in March. They are entirely new evidence that you've given orally today.
Yeah.
Entirely new evidence, right? How long have you been aware of this planning application?
A couple of years, I
A couple
think.
of years.
But yeah, no.
Okay. There are no objections, are there, on highway grounds from either the County Council as Highway Authority or the Local Planning Authority, correct?
Yeah, I wasn't aware. I would have thought Surrey would have objected on highway grounds.
I'm sorry, you have not checked what Surrey Council's position is on this application?
I've had a look through all the documentation and I couldn't see any objections. You're right, that I couldn't see any objections from Surrey
No,
Council.
because they've specifically not objected. They have
Yeah.
said, subject to the imposition of various conditions in the agreement, they're satisfied. So you weren't aware then, till I told you moments ago, that actually Surrey County Council are perfectly happy?
I thought they may well have objected, and I would have thought that, as I say, from a design perspective, I would have thought a access for a mini roundabout or something similar would be far better than a right turn lane.
Let's break it down. Till I asked you that question a moment ago, did you actually know what Surrey County Council's position was?
I haven't seen the latest one, no.
So you've come to give evidence about highway matters and safety, but you didn't think it appropriate to check what the County Council's position was?
I've looked at a lot of the documentation on the Waverley Borough Council site for
Yes, but-
this application.
I didn't ask you whether you'd looked at all the information. I asked you whether you'd looked at the position of the County Council. They have a statutory obligation as Highway Authority. You know this because you had previously worked for Highway
Yeah, yeah,
Authorities.
yeah.
They don't consider there to be any highway safety or highway objection, do they?
Well, I think if you read your own transport assessment, you'll find that there's,
Sorry, there's a lot coming out here.
yeah.
Again, please just say yes or no and then qualify it, because otherwise I'm making notes here as best I can, because you didn't
sorry.
provide a written statement. I'm making notes, and by the time I get to the end of the note, I've lost track of what the question was, and equally, frankly, your answer doesn't mean anything to me. So could we have that question
Can we have
again?
the question
And whatever
again?
the question was, can you please answer it yes or no and then qualify it?
Okay.
It really makes
Yeah, sure.
life a lot easier.
So the County Council have not pursued any objection on highway safety or highway capacity grounds to this scheme, have they?
Yeah,
Yes or no?
that's fine. Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we've produced, as you've already referred to, a transport assessment and an ES chapter dealing with transport. Those have been available for about 2 years, haven't they?
I wasn't aware of that, but that's, yeah, I stated 2022, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they've been available
Yeah.
for 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I assume in your background as a transport engineer, you yourself have never given evidence at an inquiry before.
I haven't, I've
No.
produced documents that,
Yeah,
that have gone to inquiries.
All right. And in terms of sustainable travel to and from this site, again, did you check what the position of the County Council and the Local Planning Authority was as to whether this was a sustainable location for development? Did you check their
No, I
position?
didn't.
No. And were you aware that there was an appeal in respect of the what's called Scotland Park Phase 1, which is the site beside current site, that was determined by another inspector a few years back now? Did you know that she concluded that that site, which directly adjoins us, was a sustainable location for housing? Were you aware of that?
Yes, I was.
Right. But you disagree?
I haven't, we're not talking about phase 1, we're talking about phase 2,
Yeah,
aren't we?
but they lie right beside each other. So you're, just to be clear, as I understand your evidence, you're going to suggest, are you, to the inspector that phase 1 is sustainable in its location, but phase 2, which lies directly beside it, is not sustainable in its location. Is that your evidence?
Well, I would have thought,
Is that your evidence?
yeah, I guess so, because
Right.
phase 2 accesses off the Midhurst Road, whereas phase 1 doesn't.
Yes, but that's about your issues on transport, highway safety. I'm asking you about sustainable travel modes. And I just want to be clear, are you seriously suggesting that the inspector should take the view that the site right beside our site is sustainable in transport movement terms, but ours is not? That's your position, is it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your time, and if you could let me have those
I will.
notes.
Is it, if I type them up tonight and get them,
Yeah,
get them
yeah,
to you
don't
tomorrow?
ruin your evening.
Thank you very much. No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. That I think is my list of people. Can I just double check? Is there anybody else in the room who wants to speak? Okay. Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah. I wasn't on any list.
Okay,
But
don't-
you will get a copy of what I'd say.
Don't worry. Could you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Janet Stedman. I live on Scotland's Close. I've lived there for 11 years. Before you ask, yes, I'm a member of the Residents Association and Hazlemere Association. The reason why I decided to speak following through the previous speaker is I think it's important that people also understand a little bit more about Scotland Lane. Now, I found the previous speaker's survey very interesting indeed, and quite rightly he pointed out about the traffic which uses Scotland Lane. Now, I think it's important that when a site visit goes ahead, and obviously I don't know where you are going to walk or drive, I think it's important that you do look at Scotland Lane and the junction of Scotland Lane to the 286. Scotland Lane, the majority of it is single lane because it allows parking on one side of the road. So it is a bit of a rat run. It's quite a dangerous road. There isn't any pavements on either side. Anybody who walks along it, and I do, and I drive along it, you're basically taking your life into your hands. What could be an issue, and again, I think there'll have to be scrutiny of the maps, is that, bearing in mind we've had several maps of this development, I think one of the unintended consequences is because if the plan as it stands at the moment is that the main exit is onto the 286, people will realise the difficulty of joining that road, and what they will then do is use the existing exit, which is close towards the rec ground. So they will have, look at the 286, think it's slow, think it's dangerous, use the existing exit, Scotland Lane, which is narrow, no footpath, a danger to life and limb if you're not in some big car. And that will also then compound the traffic joining to the 286. Now, that's my perspective as a resident, as a driver, not a member of any association, but I think anybody here who lives along Scotland Lane will know exactly what I'm talking about. Naturally, the increase in volume of traffic will have a major further impact on the ecosystem. And I'm also intrigued to know, if this goes ahead, quite where the access, the sequence of the development, because at the moment, the only way that lorries can get onto the site is up Scotland Lane and the existing entrance. I don't know how they do these things, whether or not they do the major 286 plan first, but there's a huge amount of concern if lorries are using Scotland Lane as well. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you.
All right, that's up for
Thank you very much indeed. I'd be grateful. Any questions? No? Thank you very much for your time. Anybody else who wishes to speak? I've not been notified of anybody who couldn't turn up today, but I mean, if people turn up within reason a little later on in the inquiry, we might be able to slot them in. But that said, thank you very much, everybody who has spoken. It's now 3:15. Have we got the technology? Fingers crossed. Okay, we got the technology. Could we just take a 10-minute break till 25 past, and then we'll move on to the design evidence? So 25 past, please. Oh, ow. About 40 minutes presentation takes us up to takes us up to about 4:15. You're cross, I think. We're looking about an hour and a half. Yeah. Defer till I think that's probably sensible. Yeah. We're immediately ahead of us. Rather than break the conversation halfway through. Yeah, we go now. Committee, it's my fault. This is what I'm asking. Well, the reason sir is that other services, yeah, so we had a problem discussing barristers. first witness.
Thank you, sir. Can you confirm you are Colin Pullen?
Yes,
You're a senior design director at the Pegasus Group. You hold a Bachelor of Arts degree in planning and a postgraduate diploma in urban design. You're a recognised practitioner, member and former chair of the Urban Design Group. And you have over 35 years experience as an urban designer in the private sector, correct?
yes,
And you tell us in your proof that you have been the principal urban designer on many residential projects for both private and public sector clients, and you've very considerable experience in the preparation of layout master plans, supported by development strategies, development briefs and design codes. And you give some examples, I think, in paragraph 1.5 of your proof. And then in 1.6, you tell us that you routinely prepare design appraisals and peer reviews to assist with development as part of a fresh set of eyes approach to understand the design decisions made and whether they are acceptable, justifiable and achieve high quality design. Is that all correct?
yes, that is.
You then tell us you've given evidence at approximately 120 inquiries or hearings over some 20 years. And on most of those cases, you gave evidence on the same basis that you are giving it here, i.e. design review, new pair of eyes, yes?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. And then you say prior to instruction, you reviewed the scheme to understand the decisions made and whether you would be able to support it. And you were then appointed to undertake a peer review. And having done that and made your review, you've been asked to present evidence at this inquiry, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you've given at 1.12 the necessary professional declaration that you confirm that insofar as the facts stated in your evidence are within your knowledge, and you've made clear what they are, you believe them to be true, and the opinions you expressed represent your true and complete professional opinions, irrespective of whom you're instructed, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And does that apply both to your written evidence and the oral evidence you're about to give?
Yes,
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is, Mr. Pullen, I'm going to hand over to you to do your presentation. I think we've got copies of the presentation handed out to people, but we've also got them on the screen. And I'm just going to let you go. I won't interrupt you probably at all, but I'll let you run through your presentation. And I think we should just explain, we have set out, haven't we, on each of these pages where you've extracted this evidence from in the core documents and the evidence, yes?
that's correct, yes.
And there are 2 pages we'll come to later on, which I mentioned earlier, where you've got some Google Earth images. I think one of them is on page 20, and I think one of them is on page 18. Those Google images are the only things that are not already in the evidence before now.
That's correct, yes.
Right, thank you. So if you would like to start, Mr. Pullen, I won't interrupt.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone here. The purpose of this presentation, it's to summarise my evidence, and in a sense, it's summarising the high quality design of the scheme and why I've come to my conclusion that it's appropriate to the surrounding context, which is particularly important for this appeal, given that the site is within the Surrey Hills AONB. And the proof of evidence addresses a point made within the statement of common ground between the council and the appellants under the section design and parameter plans, is that it's common ground between the council and the appellants that design does not form a reason for refusal. So one might ask, well, why is the designer here? Designers are quite handy to have, to be honest, as inquirers. But the para 410 of that statement of common ground goes on to say that the parties will seek to agree a suitable design code condition and will submit in evidence design matters insofar as relevant to their respective cases on landscape. And it's in that regard that I'm here today. And given that the council sought to submit design evidence on that basis, my instruction, having prepared the peer review, was to prepare the design proof of evidence, which is what I presented to this inquiry. And as part of that also was to look at the design code condition, principally to ensure that what is delivered as part of future reserve matters applications meets the expectation of high quality design. And I will go on to that in my presentation. As Mr. Ritchie said in introducing me, this presentation is principally taken from my proof of evidence, but I also draw upon the application material, and where I do, I will provide references for these. And I note also in introduction that the council had no objection to design at the previous inquiry, and in inquiry document ID 3, their closings, their case was summarised as follows: that the local planning authority accepts that the scheme would be capable of meeting design policies at the point where that falls to be assessed, i.e. whether it's in the detailed stage as part of the schemes in detail or in the outline stage. But in any event, as Mr. Collins, who's the planning witness for the appellants, accepted, policy TD1, which is the relevant design policy, requires high quality design, and policy P3 of the AONB management plan is to the same effect. And that high quality design is a minimum requirement for the Surrey Hills AONB I concur with. And further, I consider that compliance with that policy and meeting high quality design should be afforded weight in the planning balance. And that's consistent with one of the design paragraphs of the National Planning Policy Framework, 139. And it's just a small part of it, but it essentially says that significant weight should be given to development which reflects local design policies and government guidance on design and/or development that helps raise the standard of design more generally in an area, so long as they fit in with the overall form and layout of their surroundings. Now, weight is a matter which I leave to our planning witness, Mr. Charles Collins, but I would only add from my own personal experience, which is set out in my evidence, when I presented evidence at an inquiry for a greenfield site in Sarrett. Now, each scheme is of a different context, of course, but this was a site that I prepared the layout for. It had similar issues. We indeed tried to get a scout hut on the site. We also had some other benefits as well, and these are all set out in my evidence. And therein, in approving that scheme, the inspector afforded the design moderate weight. The Sarrett appeal was also accompanied by a design condition which has informed the suggested condition for this appeal, and it was similar to this appeal in that there was an outline element. Indeed, the Sarrett, it was essentially the access was to be approved, and the outline element, which was the majority of the housing, was to be determined at a latter date. Now, this presentation I'm going to do is in two parts. I'm going to start with a summary of the context, and this is principally described within the design and access statement and within my evidence. And herein, I aim to draw out the landscape and local character that's informed design decisions made. And these design decisions are what I have determined from the design and access statement, and that's where one would look to find them. I also highlight the framework of design guidance and policies which have informed my evidence and my assessment or peer review of the appeal scheme, which I measure against the 10 characteristics of the National Design Guide. And within this, I illustrate how I have gone about that process. Even though the greater part of the scheme was in outline, there's sufficient information provided, whether it's in the DAS or the supporting documents, for me to have afforded an appraisal of the character of this scheme and therein to inform a design code condition. The second part of this presentation draws from my review of the appeal scheme, particularly with regard to the appropriateness of the design response to context. And sir, as I said, I will give you a copy of my reading notes, which are taken from my evidence, sir,
Thank you.
to save your typing. It works. Sorry, we had the IT set up here and it's just nicely changed the slide for me. So what's the context of the site? This is an extract from the design and access statement, and generally this is where I go to understand whether the design team had a full appreciation of what is the context that the appeal scheme will sit within. And when I say design team, of course, that's not just the architects, Adams Architecture in this instance, it's the wider team. So I specifically look at the design and access statements because there were two, but also the landscape and visual impact assessment. And collectively, these documents with some of the others, whether it's the heritage statement as such and the planning statement, they do describe the surrounding context, the appeal site, and the effects of this appeal scheme upon it. And on reading, when I undertook my peer review, these demonstrated to me quite clearly that the appellant design team had a very good understanding of the local context to inform the design of the scheme. From this figure here, which is taken from the DAS, and this is an overview of Hazelmere, just to give some sort of general geography, we can see that the appeal scheme is more coloured in towards the bottom end of the larger coloured image. We've got a little inset up there, which I'll come on to in a second. And we can roughly see that this diagrammatically shows the sort of built areas, whether we call them urban or suburban, but those are the built areas of Hazelmere, and then how the landscape of the wider area intertwines between it all. And we can see here that we've got the strands of built development that come out from the edges. And we can see here also that there's this, what we would call as designers, the pattern and grain. So I've just highlighted a little area at the top there. It's a very low density area off Way Hill, and a little inset there. We've got large houses which look slightly random in their arrangement with their L shapes as such, but I suspect they're following the topography because we're very familiar with the topography of this area and how development tends to work within its landscape. So as you go through Hazelmere, you will find these landscape corridors or fingers coming into the built area. And the design and access statement undertakes this analysis, and it draws out what are the housing typologies and the pattern and grain. And we've talked about Scotland Lane, and we've also got Scotland's Close, which is to the immediate north. So if we just look at that area, this is one of the 6 areas from the design and access statement. So it's typical for a design and access statement in understanding what shape or form development should take, to have a look at what we call density studies or pattern and grain, what sort of development it is, how does it look on the ground, in addition to landscape, the heritage of the area, and so on, to really understand what makes a place. And we can see from here, we've got images of the 1960s, 70s housing. We've got a little calculation for the density. This is very much of its time. I think we can find that sort of development throughout most of the country. It's what we would call generic of the 1970s sort of volume house builder. And yes, you did get individual houses built as such, but they were all following, and I believe one of the residents speaking earlier spoke about the large windows as such. They were all following a sort of a design style. And we got some local materials, whether it's the hanging tile in red or the red brick as such. But generally speaking, you would find that sort of typology in Essex, you would find it in Kent. And we can see how this scheme relates to the edge of Hazelmere. So this is the current edge of Hazelmere. This is from the design and access statement. So all the references in this presentation, you'll see bottom corner of the image where the CD references and where it's coming from the DAS. And we can see what the edge currently comprises in this particular part of Hazelmere, is that it's generally those houses, their back gardens and the boundaries to those gardens, which is typical of housing estates of those times. If we move on, again, returning back to the design and access statement, consistent with best design practice, we always want to draw upon the positive elements of a place. And we'll look for that, whether it's in the local neighbourhood plan, whether it's in the local character statement, and I set those out in my proof of evidence. And these are the elements that the DAS will identify and it'll want to draw into the new developments. These are what we would look for as characteristic of Hazelmere. There'll also be characteristics of Surrey, there'll be characteristics of this part of the AONB as such. But this is, if we want a development to be contextually right, this is where we're going to start. We're going to see what's there at the moment. I now come to an aerial photograph of the site, which has got an Ordnance Survey overlay over the top. Just to put some things in perspective, we've got phase 1 Coppice Meadow to the top, that's outlined in blue. We can see Scotland Lane along the top of the drawing, the image, and we can see the lodge, Red Court cottages and Red Court, and we can see the larger part of the site in colour with the red line, with the red line boundary to it. And the site comprises approximately 23.3 hectares of land, and we can see it's adjacent to the existing southern built edge of Hazelmere. To the northern part of the site, we can see that we've got the two open paddock fields. And we can just see those at the top there. And they lie adjacent to the existing built edge. South of these, we've got the woodland, and there's a ridge line that runs within that, roughly a line just south of Red Court House, and it runs within those trees. And that extends east-west. And then to the northeast, we've got Phase 1 Scotland Park, or what is now marketed by Olivia Homes as Coppice Meadow. It was described by the landscape and visual assessment, but also the design and access statement. The site is very visually contained. It's enclosed by mature woodland and planting to most boundaries, with new woodland planting to the north. And I appreciate that we heard just now that there's some difficulties with that establishing as such, but there is that planting there proposed. It's described in the design and access statement. To the west, we've got Midhurst Road, which has a well-defined landscape character, and indeed it's enclosed for the greater part by mature trees as it rises north towards Scotland Lane from Belville Lane at the bottom. Sorry, Belville Lane, yes. It's a fast-moving, busy arterial road, as we heard, and the character soon changes one reaches the crest of Scotland Lane towards suburban development as such. Along Scotland Lane itself, the built character is low density, suburban ribbon estate development, typically large detached houses, but a bit of a mix more to the north. These ones to the north are set back behind mature gardens with walled or hedgerow boundaries, and you get some filtered views through the vegetation. Some of those dwellings do draw upon the local materials, but otherwise it's generally all quite generic of its time. And there's a diagram in the design and access statement which explains as much. It's not to say that development of its time is a bad thing, but if one's trying to understand what is characteristic of a place, we usually walk around to see how old a place is, how does the houses work, what inspired them so much. I'm now just going to look at Coppice Meadow, or Phase 1. So this is the layout plan. And it's very familiar to that of Phase 2 because it's been informed by the same guidance, the same policies, and it's designed by the same architects. This is an award-winning scheme, the Surrey Property Awards, and the exact award set out in my evidence. And it's a residential development of 50 units. It's under construction, and it provides a good indication of the design quality that one would expect of the appeals scheme. At the entrance, when one comes in from Scotland Lane, is the lodge, Red Court, and it's just off to the bottom right of the image in black and white down at the corner. Looking at the coloured layout, what we can see as a design, and I appreciate for the residents, is that I'm used to seeing these in plan form, but if you walk through the scheme, you will see this, you will see what I'm going to describe from the plan is a series of connected spaces. So when one comes in, the first thing one sees to the north with a large tree is a small green space, and it's set down, actually the topography drops down to that lower house. And then from that, the access road carries on west, so we can just see it here in the grey colour, before it arrives at another green corridor. And this connects through the site north-south, so we've got the play areas and the drainage area just at the top, where we've got the wildflower meadow, we've got some retained trees and the corridor that runs through. The density of development, so that's the built form, not just the numerical density, but how the scheme presents itself, is feathered as what we would determine towards the edges of the scheme. So that is towards the centre of the scheme, we'll find more of the terraces and the small apartment buildings, whereas to the edges, particularly towards Scotland Lane, we'll find more of the larger detached dwellings. So there's a sense of making sure that this development is integrated into the pattern that's around. And just on that, this is of course a development that's built for the 2020s, but since 2000, and probably a bit earlier, in creating new places, we're seeking to create balanced communities. So it's not like the estates of the 1960s and 70s, where you got a monotypology, whether it was a 3-bed semi or a 4-bed detached, but you didn't get the variety of what is sought in modern developments. So it's not just the detached houses, or the large semis as such. You get the terraces, you get the flats, and it provides the greater mixed, balanced community, whether it's affordable and private, a mix of them both, and the various tenures of affordable that outwardly all look the same and all reflect ultimately what we're trying to seek in design, which is a proper place. So it's not just a monoculture of semi-detached houses with garages and cars parked on driveways as such. And having grown up in Essex, good urban design was very much against that sort of typology. Commenting on the design matters for phase one, the Officer report at the time said, and it's quite telling this as to what one considers as appropriate development in the AONB, or the setting of the ONB in this instance, is that it was quoted that whilst officers acknowledged that the proposed development would result in change to the site within the setting of the AONB as a result of the landscape mitigation proposed, and in considering the presence of existing residential development along the south of Scotland Lane, which would be seen in context with the proposed development, the layout and appearance of the proposed development would integrate well with its surroundings. And the Officer report went on to say, in terms of the impact on the setting of the AONB, the development would not form an unnatural residential extension to the adjacent settlement of Hazelmere. And that chimes back into the process of the DAS for phase two, which would have probably been a similar process for phase one, is that if one understands how settlements expand and work with the topography within their setting as such, it gives you an idea as to what is an appropriate extension of Hazelmere in this instance. Staying with Coppice Meadow, we're just going to walk into this. So these are some images of it that are taken from the Olivia Holmes website. I think one of my photos might be in that lot as well. This scheme was of course granted consent at appeal. And with regard to design matters, the inspector's report stated, and I'll just quote from that, but it's within my evidence, at paragraph 128, the appeal scheme includes a variety of terraced, semi-detached and detached dwellings with a range of architectural styles in keeping with the local area. The density is low, with the proposed layout providing an overall spacious character. The materials are appropriate to the locality, comprising red and orange facing bricks, clay tile hanging, render and timber boarding. The design and layout of the scheme would be appropriate in the local area, causing no harm to character and appearance. In this regard, the scheme would comply with policy TD1 of LPP1 and SAVE policies D1 and D4 of the local plan 2002, which seek to ensure that the character and amenity of the borough are protected. And the appeal scheme draws upon these same design characteristics. And so I'd recommend walking through this just to take a look at the architecture, and I'm sure you will, sir, and to see how this one fits. Staying with phase one, Coppice Meadow, we're just going to take a quick look at the lodge. So this is an existing building that's the lodge to the Redcourt Estate, which is the cottages and the listed house, but it now marks the entrance to phase one. It's visible from Scotland Lane, but the degree to which is dependent upon the season, so I appreciate that. But it addresses the access road to Redcourt House, but also phase one now. It's a bespoke building. It's got distinctive gables, and as I'll explain a little bit later, it's a clear reference to the design of the lodge for the appeals scheme. And this is, in my opinion, it's a sensible approach if one's looking at how you create place and you look at the overall cohesiveness and comprehensiveness of phases 1 and 2. Holistically, if you're looking at Redcourt, you would expect to find the lodges at either entrances as such to have a degree of similarity. This slide here I've put in just to sort of give some background as to the process I've gone through in undertaking my peer review and ultimately this proof of evidence. And it just summarises the framework of design policy and guidance that I've applied in my review of the scheme. And it's a typical approach that I do when giving evidence or just reviewing a scheme as to whether changes should be made. So we see set out there the Surrey Hills environmental design guide and the management plan, building design in the Surrey Hills, Surrey design and the Hazelmere design statement, and then the raft of policies from the framework through to the Waverley Borough Local Plan Part 1, then through to the National Design Guide, even the National Model Design Code, which is relevant in this case because, of course, we're looking at putting a design code condition in place. And all the available guidance that was also available to the architects in preparing the scheme as to informing a judgment as to whether a design is going to meet the highest quality that one should rightly expect of this context. Moving on to part 2 now, we're just going to start with the landscape framework. And in part, this is mostly, or if not significantly, totally going to be dealt with by Mr. Andrew Smith. But I'm starting with this because it goes back to my introduction to the design and access statement. Good design is not just about the built environment, it's also about the landscape environment. We've heard the percentage of the site that's going to be built on or not built on as such, so it's 22% is that's proposed to be developed, and the remainder, 78%, largely landscaped as such. And this sets out the architect's principal drivers in what informed how they were going to approach developing the scheme for the site. So the first is the ridge line that runs through the site just where the trees are, just to the north of the trees in the middle part, and then through the trees to either side. And then there's the slopes as it drops down to the south. The second are the existing landscape features. So these will ultimately become green corridors that connect north-south through the site. And then third, it's the visual containment of the site as such and how to use that whilst at the same time not trying to shield or screen development. So let's move on to the scheme now, having set the scene for where the design and access statement took us to. And I'm going to walk through this in 2 parts. I'm going to look at the detailed element first and then the outline elements. So the area ghosted in white on this slide is the outline element, which is proposed to be subject to the design code that ties in future reserved matters applications. And that's in addition to the parameters plans and the various conditions that will come with an application. So the darker part that's not ghosted is the detailed element. So we can see from the detailed element that substantially most of that is left undeveloped, whether it's not built upon as such, but I appreciate there's a SANG and there'll be landscape works and improvements as such. Evident from the plan is this extent of landscaping, which does include the SANG. And herein, when I was undertaking the peer review, I drew upon the landscape design strategy, which sets out what this is going to comprise. So we've got large areas of grassland, which will be retained, and traditional grasses and herbs, which will be encouraged to thrive. And the wetlands and the meadow to the south would create a more biodiverse environment. Now, I'm an urban designer and rely upon, in my practice, the landscape team to come up with this, but I do look for it when I'm undertaking a peer review to just understand, as the National Design Guide sets out, are these matters covered as such? And we can see from this plan, if we study really hard and look, we can see the Scout Hall, which is the building just up here. See if my cursor may come up on it, and the Forest School building within the woodland. And these are set discreetly within the Middle Woodland and the Western Woodland or Redcourt Woods, and they wouldn't be generally visible from the wider landscape. And just having a quick look at those in turn, because these form part of that detailed element. So this is the Forest School. This has been developed in consultation with the school and a group called Built by Artisans, who are experienced in doing handcrafted, sustainable timber construction and structures in the local area. So this is a bespoke building, and being of wood construction with a very simple design, would fit in really well with its woodland setting. And then moving on to the Scout Hall, Scout headquarters. Again, this has been developed in consultation with the Scout group. It's a larger structure, but this is set at the edge of the woodland towards the proposed built area within the outline element, such that it's contained not only by the woodland landscape to the south, but the activity associated with the arrivals, departures, servicing and events as such will be principally contained and accessed from within the built area. So for a building of a larger footprint than the school, the designers have carefully thought where this should be sited and how this can have the least impact whilst having the greater benefit. The benefit being, of course, the Scout movement having this amazing facility within the setting. Again, the building's of wood. It's got a CDM roof and it would fit in with its woodland context. We're now going to move on to the proposed access in the lodge. So I'll deal with the lodge first. This defines the entrance into the wider development, and in design terms it's providing that visual marker or a keynote building. You could also describe it as a gateway as such. To the north of the lodge we've got the small visitor parking area and for users of the footpaths. And this car park area is set and visually contained by some new planting alongside Midhurst Road. So we can see the little trees with the symbols FS, FS and CSs. These will all be the particular species of the tree as such. And we can see that it's set off the drive, the main access way that goes into the site. And this car park will be passively overlooked from those entering the scheme, along the drive from the cycle footway that we've provided that runs alongside it. Beyond the car park to the north is a spigot mortar gun emplacement. It's a feature of the area that just adds interest to the walk, part of the story of the place. One of my earlier schemes, we dealt with naval structures down on the Medway. And it's always a question as to what to do with these features that relate back to the past. This is an incidental space that one would walk past, whether you're on the existing footway or on the new pedestrian cycle footpath. It doesn't require an awful lot to make it an interesting spot or a place, but it's nice that a development can pick out a feature without necessarily overly drawing too much attention to it or trying to make something bigger than what it was. One thing to note about how this is structured is that whilst in plan form, it does look like there's an awful lot of surfaces there, of course, but this is a plan. So we can't appreciate the topography nor the materials unless we actually interrogate the key. So we can see that for the paths and the cycleway, we've got a low key gravel, which is bonded. It's kind of like retained in cells. So we started off originally in design looking at resin bonded gravel, whereas now we're much happier with retaining it. And I think it's like whether it's natural or plastic type cells as such to keep the gravel in place. But it's a much lower key material and surface material than the macadam of the road. And by separating the footway from the driveway, we reduce the overall visual impact of the carriageway going into the scheme. Because of course, when Red Court would have been designed with its lodge, it wouldn't have wanted a footpath along the driveway. The footpaths weren't really high on the agenda, whereas now we're very much attuned to encouraging people to walk and cycle. And the more attractive and safer we can make that as an alternative to using the car, the better. And the planting as proposed is such that when it's mature, whether one's walking along the footpaths or driving and walking alongside Midhurst Road, you wouldn't really appreciate the degree of the connectivity of these paths and the carriageway as such because of the intervening landscape. And we can see that from the levels and the sort of some of the imagery that we've had prepared. But we'll just finish off with the lodge first. So this is the detailed design of the lodge. So in terms of the bits of the scheme that we actually physically want to get built and are part of that detailed element, it's the lodge, the school, and it's the Scout Hall. So this is the lodge. And the detailed design of it reflects that local Surrey vernacular. And this is what's been brought out in the DAS. So red brick, we've got tile hanging on the upper floor, and we've got clay tiled roofs. And this is all identified in the DAS, and it's also consistent with the Surrey Hills AONB Environmental Design Guide. And it's a theme that picks up through my peer review how is the scheme responding to the environmental design guide? And the design guide says that you should, in new buildings, celebrate the detailing of buildings and architectural features of Surrey buildings, which have a wide range of styles, but they should pick up on new buildings, should pick up on local characteristics, forms of buildings, existing properties, window, doors, roof design, etc. And we can see from the figures left, so these are examples of lodges within Surrey Hills area, but the top one's the one at Redcourt Lodge. And we can see on the smaller image, again, which is taken from my proof of evidence, those little design details that tie the two together. And we've got the common characteristics. It's a set piece design. It's similar, but it's not the same building. It's the materials. We've got the chimney. We've got a varied roof form, and the building's got its landscape setting. It's also got darker brick tones as opposed to what could have been lighter tones, as we see on some of the examples of lodges, such as Pine Lodge at Whitley, which is in stone. On a summer's day, that would be quite white. And the darker tones help because it gives you a more muted tone against the background, the surroundings. And it's especially noticeable when you look in the distance, when paler colours might stand out in stark contrast to the darker areas of woodland, such as we have here. So what does the building look? So these are, we're just going to go to some computer generated graphics now. And these are taken from Mr. Andrew Smith's evidence, and I've drawn from them. So this is building in context. And appreciate that the landscaping takes time to settle, and that this wouldn't be necessarily a view on day one as such. But what you can see here is there's a building there, but it's not overly prominent, but we can see something there. And we can see some white lining on the road. But one thing that strikes is that this isn't a particularly uncommon scene. And if I just go to the next slide, and this is one of the new slides I've added, but sir, you'd appreciate it from a site visit or if you've driven the area. And I appreciate that Midhurst Road is one of those main roads into Hazelmere, so you do sort of whiz along it. But if we just travel down that, this is a house at the bottom end of the site that we see, and there we see a house in its landscape setting. A similar sort of arrangement in that we've got the gable that's actually addressing the road as it comes down from the south. But this isn't unusual. And we're just going to go back now to our lodge, but look at it from the other direction. So this is coming down. And it's taken from the other side on probably where that the narrow footway we heard about earlier, looking back. And now we can see a little bit more. We can see that we can see the gable. We can see the existing footway of alongside Midhurst Road, just behind the fence line, but we can't see anything behind that. So we can't see the car park, we can't see the access road. And if one was walking along that footway, you might be able to see over and see the car park as such. But the impression here is nothing particularly unusual. And again, if we just carry on our drive south, we come to that house again. So buildings in landscape, as we come up and down Midhurst Road, I appreciate I've taken one example as such, but they're not uncommon. It's not uncharacteristic. So if one saw the lodge, you wouldn't be thinking, oh, even if you were mindful that they are lodges in the Surrey Hills area, you wouldn't be thinking, oh, this is completely quite strange. Moving on to the next slide. We're going to go back to the scheme now. And this is the final part of the presentation where I'm just going to look at the outline element. So we've got about four slides, I think, just keeping an eye on the time as such. And the first thing to note, just looking at it from a design perspective, is that it has a similar structure to phase one, in that there's a perimeter block layout, so we try and get dwellings to overlook the public spaces, but it responds to its context. So as to the top left of the screen, where we come into the site, we see buildings set within the landscape, stepping down the contours. So this is similar to the little snapshot we took of Hazelmere, of one of the residential areas where we had the L-shaped buildings and the detached buildings working with that landscape. We've got variable building lines as such. So coming into the scheme from left of frame, we've got the buildings work with the topography, and then it gets a little bit more ordered as you come into the flatter part of that site. We can see that there's still a strong landscape setting here. We've got corridors extending north-south through the built area. And then we've got this area of parkland. So we have the woodland, which is our visual containment, so to speak. But we also have this area of parkland, and we can see paths running through it that connect through to the wider area. Because, of course, one of the things that this scheme will bring, we've heard quite a lot about accessibility to this amazing countryside and landscape as such. Well, this scheme will open that out even further. And one could always argue, well, is it too much? Well, I think this is actually well managed, and the details as such are set out within the application document, so that whether it's in the design and access statement or the landscape design strategy, which is where I've got a lot of my information from, there's a series of connections and new pathways through this area. So you can choose to walk through the woodland, the parkland, or along through the Sang. And these corridors that are integrated into the development retain, and in some instances are enhancements of what's already there. So there's some broken hedgerow that are retained, and the road works through the existing gaps in it. And along the bottom edge where we brought in the suds, these form this sort of the village pond and the suds area. Then we have the parkland below, and we'll just come and have a quick look at that. So again, this is another image, and it's part of the design approach is that it's not just about trying to get buildings and development that look like they're part of the Surrey Hills or they're part of Hazelmere as such. It's looking at the landscape as well. So there's this, the phrase, the picturesque parkland setting of this area, and that comes out from the AONB Environmental Design Guide. It's got some various references for this. The landscape that it finds particularly attractive, and whether it's an open green area at the top, as we see there, with maybe sheep on the bottom. I'm not sure about the sheep coming on the site. Possibly, possibly not. But what you do have is this landscape's addressed by buildings, nice bits of open space, and then woodland beyond. And we can see from the imagery here, which is walking through that parkland area. So the image at the bottom is the plan view, and the image at the top is what one would see walking along it. So we've got some bluebell meadow, we've got some trees just to the other side of that. That actually might be the ponding, thinking about it, although the line of trees is the larger group, because I can see the path just to the north of the word parkland, so that's probably bluebells, and the other side of those trees is the ponds as such. And then in the background we can see the built form. So we have created a variation in the setting of that development, so you don't look out straight onto woodland for all of it. Some of the development looks out to woodland. This edge overlooks that new parkland. So whilst the woodland largely screens the built development, we've got the more open parkland spaces on the upper slopes, which are at the edge of the immediate built area. And this is going to be a new resource for the residents and visitors. This will connect through into phase 1, and therein connect through into Scotland Lane. And of course, from the footpaths alongside Midhurst Road that run up alongside, and from that car park, you'll be able to connect into this space through either walking up through the Sang or up through the woodland. And overall, what we get is an experience of walking through the development, that you get a landscape, and then you get beyond the development, and the development is very familiar to what is in the AONB, the Surrey Hills AONB, and into Hazelmere. And we can see from that layout, we can see from the wider plan before, actually, the feathered edging, how we control density, so that we get that mix of built form, we get that balanced community, so it's not all just large houses. And this is some extracts from the DAS now about how the architects have illustrated how they work with topography so that you get the approach road or the main road. This is the bottom sketch here, about how the buildings are all individually set into this landscape. This is particularly at the northern end as one comes round into that landscape setting. And where we do need to put retaining walls into buildings, they're part of the structure, so that this building's part set down to the top image now, which is a section through what is there's a little gateway building there in brown, and behind it is this little cluster that's at the very top of the drive when one arrives. And this is a particularly distinctive building and a distinctive space that one meets before turning sharp right to come into the main part of the scheme. And it's part of that sequence of spaces I was talking about earlier, in that what phase 1 does, phase 2 does, but it does it on a much greater scale as such. And just coming on to the final part of the detailed element now. So these are vignettes of the detailed proposal. And we can see two images of quite distinctive different spaces. So on the smaller image to the left is the housing typologies that are along the roads coming, the main road coming in, or the access road coming into the scheme. Detached houses, some set together, some not. Local materials, we've got buildings with a second floor set into the roof. And as we come into the middle of the site, we've got, I've taken the extract from the Pottage Garden as such, which is a combination of small apartments and small houses. We can see also in the image that it's got the solar panels as such, and of course the condition is that this will be passive house standards. So not only is it contextually working hard to make the scheme fit, it is also mindful of the environmental standards that we should be seeking in new developments. And this again, this is all part of that serial view and familiar local characteristics that are brought out by the scheme. And I'm just going to finish now on the design code condition. I'm not going to read through that, but I put the image there of the Coppice Meadows phase 1, which, if one thinks back to when I introduced how this scheme relates to phase 1, and it's a natural extension of that, if one accepts that that's the baseline, you know, that's excellent, that's very good. We like phase 1, it's there, it's looking very good. We want to make a condition for phase 2. Given that the architects that worked on both phases 1 and phase 2, and the built scheme is very close to what the architects had drawn, I think it's wholly reasonable to essentially tie the design code into the design and access statement. And it's something I've experienced personally with these architects. And my job as an expert witness, sometimes I will come across a design code, and in this instance, theirs was an incredibly robust design code that it had elements where you could seek to vary it. And in all good design codes, you have to be or build in a degree of flexibility. But given the underlying character and quality that we've got out of phase 1, I think it's entirely reasonable that we can get out of phase 2. So I drafted this code based upon my experience at Sarat. And it includes all elements that I would want to sort of tie into that outline bit, in particular how it relates to the public realm, street trees, how to make sure that they're there, because of course the wider NPPF encourages street tree planting, the car parking, and this will all tie back to the parameters and the design and access statement. So that was almost the last piece of instruction that I had, was to look at a design code that we can underline it, and of course this will be as part of the conditions part of this inquiry. And that is my last slide. I will circulate my speaking notes. They're very similar to what I've run through, but they're in aid memoir, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
That then concludes your design evidence,
Yes,
does it
sir.
not? Okay, I'm sure I won't ask you to wait there until the cross-examination, because that won't happen till tomorrow. I've got a number of things that I want to pick up on, but which may well come out in cross-examination anyway. Otherwise, we are done for today. Resume, please, at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you.